So today we have with us Razvan. He is senior associate with Hessel. He's also very active with Singapore Institute of Architects, with which we also have William with us today. So William, you may want to say a few words later after this. Yeah. So Razvan is
Sure.
the editor in chief for the Singapore Architect magazine. So this is an edition that comes out and gives a lowdown on what's going on in the practice. It's quite a nice read. For those of you who are not SIA members, I really recommend you guys to just sign up and enjoy what SIA has to offer you guys. So this event is brought to you by YAL, Young Architects League. We are under SIA, and we are really working together with SIA and the general public, with the community, to really bring together young architects, bring together young at heart architects, and try our best to make our industry better than what it is yesterday. Yeah. So over to maybe William. You want to say a few words?
Yes. Yeah, it's a bit strange, right? It's young architect, and definitely by looking at me, I am not young. But nevertheless, I think you guys are doing quite a good job in terms of harnessing the younger people in the fraternity and getting them to know more about what we are doing. And definitely we support that. That's why we feel that we should have more of this together, and at the same time exposing what the architect should be doing. You never start. You can always start as early as possible. Great. I think tonight we have we should be getting a good discussion, all right, with Razvan here. He's touching on a topic that is actually buzzing around, not only in the design field, but I think in all sectors of the society, right? We're talking about AI. So I guess perhaps we let Razvan start the ball rolling.
Wonderful. I guess that's my cue. And look, it is. I want to echo those sentiments as well. It is great to be part of this event series, and honestly, big thanks to YL for the invitation. And as you've mentioned, William, it is really a most extraordinary topic if you think about it, because it might disrupt or at least really influence not only the way that we all go about our daily professional lives, but potentially a much deeper fundamental aspect of how our profession and many other professions might be operating starting tomorrow, if that hasn't happened already. Now, as mentioned in tonight's talk blurb, if you had a chance to read it, I'm not really keen to go over the what and the how of AI. There's really a lot of really great material out there that talks about prompts and workflows, and I'm sure other speakers would have covered some of those aspects already. Instead, today, what I wanted to do is go together with you all and take a deeper dive into the broader cultural, the past, the present, and the future of our discipline. And maybe we can try to reframe together the future value of architects through this lens of an AI-powered process. And I really do hope that you will have opinions, whether you will agree or even better disagree with what I have to say. So at the end, I really want to hear some curly questions come my way, and hopefully we can work our way through them. And maybe a good place to start is actually the title of tonight's talk, which is focused on the agency and creativity that we should all collectively aspire to evolve and develop as a profession. And in reality, if you read these two lines, it is a direct lexical nod to a book that I found incredibly insightful back when I was in college, written by Rainer Banham. And this book didn't just take a historic look at the turning tide of modernity, but a really serious, broader cultural view of the specific period in time. So I'm trying to subliminally encourage all of us to take a similar holistic cultural outlook at all the changes that we're going through now. So as we live in the moment, can we do so with some sense of perspective? And if we go way back in time, I'm talking hundreds, if not thousands of years, the driving agency and force that shaped the world was essentially muscle power. I mean, the original architects, the master masons, like many other trades and early professions, had a very direct and physical relationship to their work. Now, what happened over time is that steam power and electricity and computation and most recently artificial intelligence have progressively displaced aspects of our human ability. And they've pushed us to search for relevance in new territories. So the big question now is, do we have anywhere else to go? And as recently as 2017, in his Life 3.0 book, Max Tegmark spoke about the landscape of human competence in a really visual and evocative way, describing a scene like the one that you can see on the screen. And there are some occupations just within the floodplain that are deemed at risk, high risk, while some of them are on a higher ground, allegedly safely away from the flood. But now that we live in 2023, we have found out that's not the case, and the tide has been rising faster than we have imagined. A lot of high value work, like medical diagnostics or complex legal problems, can be automated quite easily. So what is it that puts professions at risk? And to answer that, I will use Kai-Fu Lee's labor charts. Now, on the x-axis, you can arrange professions from highly procedural and repetitive in a structured environment, like on the left-hand side, all the way to the ones that are perhaps happening in a less structured environment, if not even borderline chaotic, like ours. On the y-axis, we will look at the social dimension of each profession and how much empathy is needed to perform those tasks. And I hope by now you can already see where I'm going with this. I guess the little avatars should give you a clue. So let's start reading the chart. Now, in the bottom left quadrant, we see the danger zone. These tasks are so repetitive and require so little EQ that AI can probably do them. And that might happen very soon if it's not happening already. In the bottom right quadrant is the slow creep. This is not dangerous yet, but is getting there. So this is where humans will use AI to perform a majority of tasks, and we either control or moderate the outcomes. On the top left, we have what's called a human veneer. And here, although a good chunk of this work is done by AI, the human, social, or EQ dimension is and will continue to be needed. So I guess as a loose example, let's say an AI can generate a really clear career coaching plan for me or any of us. But we still need that person that connects with us in a really deep and meaningful way, almost like a pastoral way to bring us along the journey. And lastly, what the hope is could be a safe zone. And in the safe zone is a place where, although we are AI powered, the human does play a really consequential role in curating and managing the process and the message. So I guess this is all good and clear for a variety of professions. Thank you, Kai-Fu Lee. Really great book, by the way, if you get your hands on it. But what I want to do with you now is take a step further and maybe extrapolate this chart to map architecture. More specifically, all the various tasks that we all have to do every day as part of our professional services. And here it is. I do wonder how this slide makes you feel. And look, you don't have to answer out loud, but have a good look at the chart and think of, say, maybe a month in your professional life. Which quadrant do you spend the most time in? Which type of service do you think makes your practice valuable? What do your clients come to you for? And I know it can be confronting depending on the type of practice that we are in, but I think as a profession, we probably have to acknowledge this and somehow work towards renewed value and relevance and get ourselves into this long-term safe zone position. But I appreciate that's easier said than done because the real test is in how we respond. And I guess the least productive conversation is probably hanging on to a status quo that might disappear. And Dan Susskind's book, The Future of Professions, in his book, he calls this the grand bargain, which most professions seem to have made with their legislative bodies. If a piece of software can be, say, as good as a QP or lawyer as any of us, hypothetically, then how relevant is our professional license? Is it just for reliability purposes? Do we need to better articulate our value proposition? Do we need to diversify? Maybe. But also the danger there could be taking a derivative application approach. And we were talking about it just before we started with the presentation, that over the past few years, we've had a lot of shiny new fads come and go. But maybe this time, AI might give us a chance to take a more meaningful innovative, process-driven mindset. If we don't treat AI, obviously, as just another faster substitute for other tools. Now, this thought on the screen is what keeps me up at night. Are we so hung up on the tools of our past that we cannot think outside the box for our future? Is this a valid concern? Am I being paranoid? I don't know. Hopefully we can talk about it. But speaking of value proposition, if you think about it, architects mainly charge for time and deliverables. So when the tasks that make up the time and produce the deliverables become commoditized, where is our cutting edge contribution? And I'll leave that question open as well. And I'll double down and make another controversial statement. Architecture has lost direct touch with the real product of our work, which is the building, centuries ago. The second paper was invented as a medium. Our role has primarily been that of conjuring and representing design ideas. Hundreds of men and women with rolled up sleeves producing 2D images, plans, sections, details of future building, but not the building itself. And sure, the computer made it faster and better and made it 3D. And if the computer didn't get the message, we drew it a little picture as suggested here. And we pointed a little gun at the screen and we drew a little house. And sure, I know these photos may look funny now, but this is essentially what we do now. It's just that we do it in BIM. It's still a representation of architecture. So when ChatGPT comes out with this stunt tweet and says, AI won't replace you, a person using AI will replace you, I'm thinking to myself, just stop it. You're perpetuating the same vicious cycle of replacing one tool with another tool. From a little gun that we point at the screen, now we type away on our keyboards and some sort of design magically shows up. I think that is the most predictable, derivative way of using AI because it focuses on the outcome. And what I want us all to do is to use AI to really question our why as a profession and as a discipline, our process of design, our value as thinkers, as empaths, as aggregators. I would like us to reinvent architecture, not just do it faster with AI. Because my existential fear is that if we're using a new tool with an old mindset, that's pretty much embracing obsolescence. So recently I made some noise and the good folks from Tatler were kind enough to run an opinion piece I wrote back in September in the early days of Midjourney 3.0. And feel free to scan the code for the full article. And I feel that 9 months later, I still stand by the same 4 key takeaways of this piece, which are seductive images, and we spoke about it as well in the very beginning, and great design are 2 very different things. Good design is almost always all about the process, not the outcome. AI could be an antidote to the Pinterest addiction, and conceptual clarity will level the playing field and produce new winners. And before we get into pretty pictures, over the past week, I saw this other stunt float across social media, and I thought to myself, that sounds pretty arrogant. So I would like to turn the mirror back to creatives and ask, as a creative, how accurately and persuasively can we describe what we've done, why we've done it, and how will it make a difference? Are we sure we're safe? Because remember, it's not enough just to produce stuff. I think we also have to be super clear, probably more than ever, on why it's valuable and for whom. Because this value and critical conceptual clarity actually translates better and better across the different evolutions of the AI model. And William just mentioned how quickly things are improving. With every new release, the accuracy increases, the accidents decrease, the novelty is starting to wear off. So when we produce an image, we should scrutinize it and scrutinize the intent more and more because now we can. And now I'll take you through a series of images that I produced steadily over the past 10 months. And if in version 3, we could probably turn a blind eye to some of the imperfections and focus more on the atmosphere and on the mood, I think in the newer versions, the attention to detail, composition, hierarchy, intent is even more taxing. So if the left-hand side image can get away with being a loose vignette of biophilia, the one on the right should withstand scrutiny at so many different levels, from composition to proportion, laws of physics, light, workplace settings, and so on. To me, AI forces us to think harder, especially because we're getting feedback on our thoughts within seconds. So where does AI belong in practice? And most importantly, how could it underpin a conceptually clear design process? And some of the images that you're about to see are a blend of Hassel work and also some of my own personal research. Now, first, let's get the P word out of the way. We finally have the chance to move on from using other people's work to illustrate our ideas, which just doesn't feel right, to using our own thoughts, original, unique, crazy design ideas that may generate a much more genuine mental map of our design intent. I think we have a great chance of achieving this relentless originality and consistency using AI tools to test, push, and express our thoughts, which should essentially help us ideate faster and prototype things. Now, back in 2019, we tried 4 days to find an image that encapsulates the spirit of one of our design projects, which is forest bathing in the heart of the city. And let me tell you, we came across some really horrible images when searching for that. It took forever, and we didn't get it right. And only a few months ago, we managed to create something that not only speaks to the conceptual drivers of the project, but it does it with a bit of lightheartedness, with a bit of distance. Of course, the project won't look like that, but it might feel like that. Mood imagery can finally be not just a physical descriptor, but an experiential suggestion. And this is a project where we took inspiration from tropical vernacular. And here we marry typology with abstraction and also representation. And we wanted to create a visual conceptual diagram that is half descriptive, but of course less descriptive than a photograph, and definitely more evocative than a simple 2D diagram. And trust me, there aren't any images of isometric watercolor vernacular anywhere online because I did search. Same project, mixed media. This is an earlier study where we did a quick Rhino and Enscape mockup, enough to further develop and explore more ideas in Midjourney. And more recently, taking one of my hand sketches and trying our hand at bringing it to life using Stable Diffusion and Control Net. Now, this technique is early days for me at least, but I can tell you that Carlos Bagnon is a master at this process. So I hope you do tune in for his talk later in the year, because control is ultimately required to hone these ideas in. It's not enough just to let your imagination and AI loose. You have to know what is valuable and why. And this is what I mean by conceptual clarity, this ability to be in control of the process. Now, the next few studies are pushing the tool a little bit harder, and they're definitely a little wacky. So I took the photo on the left-hand side at NUS during thesis review lunch break, because it reminded me of Wisma Dharmala Sakti in Jakarta by Paul Rudolph. I mean, it's essentially a process of rotating and stacking simple shapes, which is very architectural in nature. So, kudos to the catering team, amazing work. And last month, I wanted to reverse engineer a different stacking of plates into architecture. And with a bit of control, assistance, iteration, a building-like form starting to take shape little by little, it transformed this stack of plates into something that starts to smell of architecture. Now, personally, I am much more fascinated by the steps in between, because these iterative evolutions are great areas where conceptual clarity can direct the progress and really intervene in a meaningful way as needed. So while the final product may look somewhat seductive, if you like Heatherwick, I guess, it's less consequential, at least for me for now. And you can start really anywhere. I mean, the next few images are essentially taking Hassel work that we have done and reimagining them as a point of a new starting point for the conversation. And here you can see a more abstract take on the workplace terraces that we designed for the GSK Asia House here in Singapore. And you can keep adding and remixing new ingredients based on your drivers and your aspirations, and essentially produce your own mood board that explores very clear ideas where you are able to trace back the lineage of any particular outcome and then come back and intervene along the way. Now, for the last few slides, they were actually born out of a really interesting critique I heard about AI. And that's probably a really fair point to make, which is, all AI generated images seem to look the same. And yeah, they do have a relatively high degree of photorealism and predictability by now, which wasn't there in the very beginning. So some of these other series are starting to test different materials and modes of representation, like tarp or fabric, for instance, represented in a studio Ghibli color. And also what I learned by starting to expand my own knowledge and vocabulary is that it forced me to go back and learn a lot more about what's out there. Architects are so used to representing or thinking about the world in very preset ways. So in a way, it even kind of going back to school and taking art classes and really exploring the limits of how you can not just represent, but to others, but even to yourself, your own ideas. And I also started to explore different forms, shapes, and colors just to see what's possible. And over here, I had a little bit of fun with deriving depth and iterating through a series of spatial alternatives based on a canny resemblance and stable diffusion. And you can see at work in these simple animations, a number of different AI tools combined to test different effects. Or if you want, you can go really analog, really retro with a representation style, which I found to really useful in bringing to life the geometry and composition of the building. There's just less distraction to contend with, which was really refreshing. In a world saturated with photorealism, can we bring old techniques back? I personally don't see why not. Or can we infuse the images with a painterly quality which has a wonderful way of conveying color, gradient, shadow, contrast, not to mention is a lot more forgiving to details. So we get to focus on the bigger spatial conversation. And it's great to see powerful new tools come online because it shifts our mindset away from the one silver bullet type of software. And here I'm talking about Photoshop's latest generative tools. In this instance, I took a mid-journey image that I was happy with, but some that had bad artifacts on the ceiling, and we healed it and also managed to add a few people and a little cat. And it's a really cool way of, taking a base image and crafting more bespoke narratives around it in ways that wouldn't have been possible before without investing a full day of work. Or for instance, we can take a scene that is produced in generative AI, in this case, a mid-journey scene I put together, and building a bigger, broader environment around it, which sometimes could be a really useful way of filling gaps in our own imagination. So in closing, given all the multiple choices at our disposal, I did want to come full circle to that first question of where are you heading and why? Because that might just give us a better, more discerning way of choosing which tools are we using, how, and why. And maybe here's a good place to stop and invite the moderators and you all to have a chat. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Razvan. Okay, so I think one word that you used early on, you said existential, right? I think that word really encapsulates what your presentation is about and what a lot of our main concern is with the advent of AI. I mean, all of us, we've seen how Facebook tried to push metaverse and failed spectacularly. And there is a fundamental difference between how we received metaverse and how we are receiving AI right now, because something in us knows that it's completely different. It's a different game we're playing with AI. It's very scary because we know the potential, and it's also very scary for those people who are doing AI because they know that they can harness so much of it to do what basically anything, right? Every industry is talking about AI because it is real, it is now here with us, and it is here to stay and grow. Not It's totally different from metaverse. We look at it, something in us tells us it is not gonna be around. There's a different impact to it. Yeah, so I guess that's it that from me. That's what I want to say first. I see a lot of people in our audience who are pretty interesting. I mean, we have Hui Lian. Is Hui Lian still? I saw Hui Lian's name over here. Hui Lian from Farm. I mean, as a moderator, I can arrow people to come and
Sure, put them
comment
on
a
the
little
spot.
bit, right? Yeah, Hui Lian, maybe. Are you able to comment or give a check? Are you here? Wait, SIA, are the audience able to say something? Oh, I saw. Yeah, so Hui Lian, I'm gonna arrow a few names, and if you're still tuning in and available, maybe you'd like to like say something. Hui Lian, Su Han, I see a Han. Is that Su Han? Arrow Su Han. I see Wen Tian. Wen Tian is the chairman of Young Architects League. He's here with us today. I see Joshua Komarov from Lecker. See Bianca from RSP, and I see Aloysius Lian. Aloysius Lian is also very active with us in YAL and SIA.
Well, in
Okay,
the spirit of sharing, Bianca is from Hassel.
oh, right. Okay, oh, yeah, she has. Oh, right, yes. Forgot she has recently joined Hassel. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna arrow Aloysius if you're tuning in. Aloysius, what do you have to say?
Oh, hi. Okay. I think the lecture, the sharing is quite interesting from the architect's point of view. But do we have any feedback that you guys have from other stakeholders, like for example, contractors or even like the client side? For those of you who have been using this data. That's a thought of mine. Not
That's a good question. I assume it was aimed at me. I personally don't have any feedback from contractors per se. But I'm curious, why did you ask the question? How do you think that the way other related professions, or say construction industry, to use a term we all use, allies' view on AI may influence ours?
Because I'm also teaching at BC Academy, where there's been a uptrend in people from the construction side taking up specialist diplomas in computational BIM. And I can see that there's a lot of contractors who are using whatever that we have been teaching them, for example, Grasshopper or Dynamo in Revit, for them to implement in their, for example, site planning, or even just automating the more mundane parts of their workflow, like their tunnels. So I would presume that they are quite receptive and in fact quite generous in their investment into technology. Yes, so that's where I'm coming from for this question.
That's a really good point. And look, if we think of any trade, people will never resist any option to make their work faster, right? Because time is money, to kind of regurgitate a platitude. And I guess one of the first things that we tried as well in our studio at Hassel is looking at ways in which some of these procedural repetitive things, or things that may require a certain advanced ability to code, can benefit from using not just Dynamo and BIM, but also, say, Python scripts and so on and so forth. So I guess that's, in a sense, the low-hanging fruit, which was shown on the chart earlier today. Anything that can be automated, or anything that can be, especially things like coding, right, which do lend themselves to the machine logic that computers excel at, will be done so. I guess where I'm coming from, and the way I try to frame it tonight, and obviously we shouldn't disregard them as architects, if there are ways in which certain workflows that we are using as part of our everyday jobs, or very specific technical aspects of what we do for a living, can be automated in a safe way as well, because sometimes you do have to check to make sure that whatever computer says is not entire gobbledygook. We will do it. So that's a given to me. I think that the angle I was coming from was, and that's all, apologies to jump back, and that is all seeing AI as a tool, right? The same way that Grasshopper or Dynamo or other things were making parametric design more possible back in the day, or certain pieces of software that engineers use are able to optimize the surface. So from a nonsense triangulated mesh, they can optimize it such that all panels are flat and they are of equal sizes, and to the untrained eye it looks the same, but in terms of constructability and material saving and workmanship and so on is 90% better. So to me that's a given, and I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about it because it will happen. To me, it's kind of going back to the cultural project of architecture, which I think we talk very little of generally, which is at the heart and soul of our practice. We're here to create places for people and to leave behind a better planet than we found. And I hear very little talk about that. We all get obsessed with how fast can we do stuff and how accurate can we do stuff and how fast can we comply. And yet I have seen very little conversation around how AI can improve the way that we as a discipline, as a practice, can create healthier, better, more livable environments, and whether indeed it'll change the way that we communicate the value of the profession. And that's where I was coming from with that slide around in the quadrants, that high EQ, high unpredictability. To me, scripting stuff to build it is low EQ. You just have to focus on how to get it done, and high predictability because you just have to get it done. Whereas the value of architects as a humanistic profession is how do we bring along all the many, many stakeholders? How do we think for people and non-people as well? How do we think of ecosystems? I think that's where ideally we will start moving towards, because at the end of the day, what we do, we are the custodians of the built and natural environment. And there's a degree of, I guess, technology needed, but there's a much, much, much larger degree of cultural EQ needed in the way that hopefully the future of architecture will pan out. So I know it's not an answer for you, but it was a really good cue for me to maybe speak about this preoccupation of mine as well. I see Josh has his hand up, so I'm sure he's got a curly one to throw at me.
Hey, Razvan. Thanks so much for that sharing. That was really inspirational, and also I think you're really working to clarify against a backdrop of enormous amount of cultural noise, and that's really, really helpful and compelling. I actually have two curly ones for you. The first one is a little bit more kind of procedural, and it has to do with the evolution of Midjourney. As a Midjourney user myself, I noticed with V3 there were a lot more interesting errors, kind of weirdnesses, things that popped up during the process of generating images. And somehow the V4, V5 are kind of starting to, I feel like, become more perfect. They're starting to iron out a lot of the kind of strange anomalies. And you could see that a little bit in the images that you were showing just now as in terms of comparison. And I was just wondering how you feel about that, if in a way, one of the interesting functions of Midjourney was not to be perfect, but to kind of make mistakes or to do things in a strange and inhuman way that would then kind of produce artifacts, but visual artifacts of a kind that were potentially useful and interesting as an exploratory tool.
Can I answer this one first?
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll go to the second one. So to answer this one, yes, I agree with everything that you've said. There was a certain, it's almost like those toys that you buy and you don't know what's inside the box when you send a Midjourney prompt. And it was always interesting, sort of what you got at the end of the rainbow could be a person with 8 fingers on one hand, or it could be one of the most amazing atmospheres that you've ever seen, because the degree of non-determination of the outcome actually allowed room for surprise. And to me, that was in those imperfections lied the potential for invention, because now I am, as someone who is OCD and obsessed with control, I do like to see images that turn out just the way I thought they should, which makes me wonder, am I thinking hard enough? Am I missing something? And that's why on purpose, sometimes I choose V3, which you can do on Midjourney. And see what comes out, and then use that. Now I'm getting procedural, but use that image and that prompt as a basis for generating V5 versions of that image, and then see what the newer version makes of it. And I think what's interesting about it, and I'll actually quote you, because I remember when you were talking about designing for children, and you were talking about the box and how there's a certain playful transgression that happens when kids take a box and make everything out of it. They make a house, they make a car. So kids are the best clients because they never use architecture as intended. So they explore different ways of interacting with space, which adults, we will always use things as intended. We will never come up with something transgressive and innovative. So in that way, I did feel like Midjourney 3 was that really clever child that is intuitive and curious and interested in accidents. So yeah, on one hand, obviously, when you're trying to represent something with a degree of accuracy, is good to have control. And to me, that should happen later in the creative process. But I do miss at times, and that's why sometimes I go back to version 3, is to generate those really loose, raw, unexpected errors or accidents and we know some of the world's best innovations happened by accident, most of them actually. So I think just being able to shift between versions is probably a workaround.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a really kind of compelling thing. And in a way, it makes us thankful that multiple versions are available as opposed to the kind of replacement, kind of upgrading sort of ideology that a lot of kind of software has. And so my second question is a little bit more kind of, I guess, blown out and kind of about architectural culture. And the question is, one of the things that we've all seen in the wake of AI is, of course, is this tremendous emphasis on the pictorial, right, on the visual. And that works really well with a kind of shift in architecture as it becomes kind of more oriented toward being photogenic, right, to kind of go viral on social media, or to kind of appeal in a kind of a very immediate, kind of digestible way through the visual, right? And what I'm interested in is whether this enormous glut, this accessibility, or this easy ability now to make this kind of imagery that has that wonderful kind of picturesque quality that looks like a Snøhetta rendering from like 2005, if there is a certain image fatigue that comes with that, where at a certain point we've all overdosed on high quality imagery, and whether you feel that, and I guess I'm asking you to speculate here, like, do you think that is going to force a kind of shift in the values of architectural culture away from the visual and the pictorial and toward things like the relational or the social or the conditions of production or the equity that architecture either promotes or works against? I mean, are we seeing a possible moment, like a possible redemptive quality that kind of pushes us back from the limit of this kind of image fixation that we've been moving toward in recent decades?
Realistic answer, no. Deep hope, yes. Because if you're looking at, I think overdose is a good word for it. If you're looking at, before AI, we're using a ton of Pinterest, right? Like everyone every design is an aggregation of its kind of Pinterest mood board. And what I've noticed over the past, say, 10 years is a flattening. If we thought the international style, 50 years ago was bad, I think if you look at, I challenge you to find any coffee shop anywhere in the world designed over the past 10 years past 3 years that doesn't have pastel colors and arches. Like every bloody coffee shop is pastel colors and arches. And that's before Midjourney. So we've been kind of overdosing on Instagram and Pinterest, and really lapping it up. So I do hope at some point, and that's what I was saying, conceptual clarity is so important, not only because it helps you produce a better image, but it hopefully somewhere in that process, you will, in that kind of, I guess, relentless pursuit of an architectural outcome that we all have built into our DNA somehow against our best interests, we will find other interests in architecture. I mean, we're all chasing that building / interior / spatial design, that outcome that is going to look amazing on Instagram, and we're going to publish it on Singapore Architect, and you'll see it on Design. There's very little conversation still around why do we do architecture, for whom, what you were mentioning, the cultural, social dimensions of architecture. So hopefully, yes, that will be produced, but I, as you know very well, I do not have a crystal ball anywhere in the house. And I wish somehow it got us to the point, just like it got me. I've been doing so many images that look plausible that I just missed an old school watercolor, man. And once I did one, I'm like, I'm gonna do another one, and we're gonna try to, look at other types of representation and what does it matter. I mean, what matters more to us when we think about those environments. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do it fast enough to not chase the rendering for a week, but you see it in a few seconds, and then you decide that there's something else that matters to you as a creative and as an architect. Yeah, so that's all the comments I have on that one. I see Jim Tan has his hand up as well. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for the questions. Jim?
No, I'm sorry. I kind of pressed the wrong button. No question. Sorry.
Okay.
False alarm.
We can move on to there are two typed questions. I arrowed Hui Lian, and she has she has raised up something. So very interesting to see the potential of the visuals and how you tap into the tool. Not sure if you shared this, but what do you think could be the bane of AI in our practice?
I'm having to
Okay.
think. I'm processing. I'm
Yeah.
not as fast as AI. Give me a second there. I think for our practice, it's kind of similar to what Josh seemed to intimate, which is there could be very quickly an oversaturation of compelling imagery, and that's probably something that I could see early on when I finally, for the first time in my life, I decided to be an early adopter of something, and it was Midjourney when it was launched publicly. And I think what I found interesting in the first month is that I have never seen so many images of Blade Runner, sci-fi, retrofuturistic cities in space ever in my life. Like, it's like everyone just kind of started prompting these things. It was just an oversaturation of Dune, Blade Runner, retrofuturistic stuff, steampunk, and you name it. And I guess what I found at first fascinating and then annoying is that, and that's a comment I made on Metaverse as well when it was still red hot before crypto crashed, is that it's easy to suspend your disbelief when what you're creating is fantastical, right? Like, we all, I'm not tickled by the fact that you will have no legs in Metaverse and you can be a cat. I mean, it's a computer game. It can be anything. The same way I'm not necessarily blown away when in the beginning, when, a house in the sky made of white gauze and soap bubbles designed by Miyazaki in a Dune setting. Like, sure. So what I gave myself in the very beginning, those images, was very, very strict parameters to observe, which had to do with environment, which had to do with tropicality. Like, I wanted to push myself to be able to represent the thickness of our equatorial air, for instance, right? And I think that's where being, that kind of first point I made, which is a good build, a good image and a good design are not the same thing. And don't fall in love with your own work. I think that the danger here is a lot of folks will think they can design even more than before. And the danger is that all will fall over like a castle of cards when you're talking about the work that you do with AI. So I think architects should embrace it. I think they should really not fear AI, but you should do so with a critical filter. And I think very soon you'll see that sometimes you actually don't need to use AI. And I find that as well. Sometimes sketching is faster than iterating through imagery. But I think you can go between platforms quite easily. And the buzzword, I mean, it's no longer a buzzword, it's a given. So I think, like any tool, there's a lot of novelty in the beginning. I personally think it's wearing off. I think now even, we are overdosing already. So people are looking for really good images that tell a story that means something. And that's down to the person talking about them. So I'm pretty sure that will make a difference between a good designer and a lucky designer, where a good designer can show up with a good image and really knock it out of the park because they thought of every single thing. Whereas a lucky designer might have just chanced upon a good image, but the way they talk about it, or the way they manage to bring a client along on a journey, or their audience, that disconnect will be there. So yeah, that's my view on that.
I think, I guess if I can summarize it, maybe you're saying like something like it lowers the bar to entry, but it raises the bar to excellence, for example.
Yeah, like with anything. I mean, honestly, it flattens the field as well, because you can think of firms who have renderers, a team of renderers in-house, right? And firms who don't, a small practice that is just 3 people, they don't. And suddenly both practices can create imagery quite fast without a team of renderers. And that's why I was saying it might create new winners. It levels the playing field. I don't necessarily see it as a bane. I think it'll just create a new economy of talent.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Could you, from Shireen Yo, could you elaborate more on the graph you showed earlier with the X and Y axis and architectural tasks? I'm curious as to how you think the future of our job will look like. You also hinted at this idea of architects being more engaged with the site in the real world and away from paper. So how do you envision that looking like? By the way, great presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. You're very kind. Yeah, so the graph, look, it's not original. Kai Fu Lee came up with it in the context of other professions, and he was looking exactly at those parameters, which is how predictable and repetitive are the tasks that you are doing, and then how much, how social is the job that you're doing, from one that you can just do alone without speaking to others or without high EQ, to the ones that require that high EQ. So what I try to do, and I'm not going to lie, I also enrolled ChatGPT in selecting some of these, and then I moderated them and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously we have to think of our own jobs, and there are so many different tasks that are that we do as part of architectural services, and some of them are require incredible empathy and incredible situational awareness and knowing how to work with people. And some of them just require technical knowledge, which is also very important. Some of them require many hours of mulling over things. So if we follow the same logic, and that's why, I say take it with a pinch of salt, because I try my very best, and that's probably something we can do more broadly. I encourage everyone to try to do their own version of it. If you try to use the same criteria and you map your own job and what you do for a living, if say, this week all you've done is check compliances, well, chances are that those are very repetitive things that you can do by yourself. The question is, will AI do that? I don't know. We had that debate yesterday with the Archie team at Hassel. And of course, I mean, the conversation comes back to the question of liability. Well, if an AI can calculate the running distance between 2 staircases in a sprinkler building, and it finds that it doesn't comply, and it gives you 3 options, and you choose one, and it turns out to be the wrong one, and something bad happens, who's liable? So it comes down to that. That to me doesn't sound like the most compelling safeguard for the future of architecture. So it makes me wonder, the things that AI seems to be pretty terrible at so far is being empathetic, being subjective, being unfair, being unequal. But if you realize those seem like negative terms, but actually that's what being human is. Sometimes you have to prioritize things that are counterintuitive because they lead to a better outcome. Because if we design just based on 100% facts without taking human preference and idiosyncrasies of nature and social customs and so on, then our buildings will be unlivable. There will be incredibly good pieces of engineering, perhaps, but they would not be environments that nature thrives. So I think that's where my speculation is, that a potential safer zone for architects is a zone where you are tapping into those tasks that require the ability to connect, to work with others, to take other people on a journey of discovery, to deal with curveballs, to have patience, to not necessarily find the most efficient result, but the most appropriate result, which sometimes is not the same thing. To find compromise. I don't know how compromising AI is yet. And I think that's where I try to organize those tasks and see which of them can become, I guess, areas where architects or younger practices might want to grow in, and which are areas that will be more and more done with the assistance of AI. Now, when it comes to engaging with the site, that was a bit of a sleight of hand, I guess. It's, if you think about it, even on site, I doubt anyone in this room, and I might be wrong, has been engaged in the direct building of a building on site. We are still checking that the building is built in accordance to the drawings that we've drawn, which is that kind of facsimile of a building. So in reality, our relationship to the actual building is still one of kind of distance and representation. We don't build as we go, like we used to do centuries ago. So I think, to me, site is not just a construction site, but it's just out there in the world, collaborating with other people, not just locked up in our offices, drawing this abstract representation of a building. So yes, it could be from being on site to being in workshops, to doing design strategy, to doing focus groups, doing a lot of other things that are more social in nature and more pastoral in nature than technical in nature. But that's my speculation, and it doesn't necessarily represent the way our practice is going to go or the way the industry will go. Take it or leave it. I think I put it out there for a conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess related to what your answer on how essentially we still need that artistic input from architects, right? Using your actual human brain to figure out what it is that makes us different from a machine. Kam actually has a question. So AI ideates from existing stock of design, you're basically averaging out what's available out there. So while it may seem creative now by novel combinations, but the purity of a great concept design that talks to users and be buildable might not come from AI. As an engineer dealing with designing with architects, it seems like AI is just another inward tool that takes us away from our clients, away from users and community. So how do you see AI being used with those conversations?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you for raising that. Well, there's actually two questions in one, or I guess two different topics in one. And I think I'll deal with the first one first, which is this notion of creativity. And I think we spoke about this one during Archifest a few years back when we were talking about evidence. And I remember one of the speakers at the SA conference was saying that there's no such a thing as intuition, that intuition is just stuff that you've seen before. And it's just a kind of shorthand for creativity. And the process of design has to go through that kind of iterative sort of up and down of kind of distilling all the different inputs into something that addresses them or derives its nature from them. So when it comes to just generally AI ideas from existing stock of design, so do we. I mean, I would challenge everyone on this call to think of an idea that they came up with that has never been done before. And I think that's tough. And I think the putting the pressure on ourselves to come up with something that has never been done before is not something we should be doing. I mean, the late Virgil Abloh, he was talking a lot about the 3%, that, you know, all you need is to innovate 3%. And you would have done really, really well to move a product or an idea or something forward by even 3%. So don't try to do 100%. Do the 3%, and if you get a good 3%, you're in a good shape. So I think when it comes to that, to me, a great design concept, honestly, and again, that's my subjective opinion, is one that has gone. It's not kind of that providential. You have a dream, you wake up, you sketch it, and there it is, the best thing since sliced bread. No one ever has come up with it. It is a result of a really painstaking, thorough process. So to me, AI, again, can help along that journey of coming up with with that slowly, with that conceptual clarity. It's almost like chipping away the marble for the statue to be revealed. And it can be used to engage with clients, with the community. It could be used to elicit emotion. It could be used to bring ideas to life in a way that it hasn't been done before. That is yet another. It's not for architects to lock themselves up in their studios and come up with the best thing the world has ever seen. It's for them to communicate to others so that others give us feedback. I think that myth of the architect as a creative lone kind of lone wolf is really dangerous, because our work is only relevant to the people that we do it for, and the best way to actually chip away at that marble block is by getting their feedback. So to me, essentially, architecture is a social act, and AI is just another way of eliciting responses from the people that you're in conversation with. So I think, honestly, that's how I see AI being used. I've been using it that way, just showing people really loose images and thinking and asking them, how does this make you feel? Do you think it's anywhere near what your aspirations are? Here's what I think about it. It becomes that thing that you put on the table as a conversation starter. It's not that thing that architects put on the table as, here's my right answer. That's what we should be doing. Because that's not our role. Our role is to be conveners, not to impose our will on the rest of the sort of planet people. I hope this answers it.
Yeah, yeah, I see a thumbs up there. Hope the answers.
Thank you.
While you're speaking, I was just thinking, for example, participate in design. I mean, Larry works with kids and people who are completely not used to architecture. So in that way, he could, in fact, that's something. Is Larry here with us? No, Larry is not here. Yeah, but I mean, imagine if kids, they can't really articulate themselves in architecture, but then each of the kids that he works with just describes the kind of library they want to design, the kind of playground they want to design in words. And then they get a visual image, and then they go on from there, You do it
Speaking of kids, and look, maybe even Beep Lab could be using that, right? But I met a person who runs this really interesting practice in the UK called Umbrellium, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And he's a mad scientist. He gave a lecture at SUTD as well recently, and he was talking about using AI for kids that are nonverbal, and helping them manifest their imagination in different ways. And it was interesting because they were coming up. I mean, going back almost to the question that Josh was asking earlier, they came up with things. Again, we would think of applications that are sensible in our own kind of frame of mind, which is the world acts a certain way and gravity works a certain way. But they would come up with things like a corgi cactus. What is a corgi cactus? Well, AI gave them a picture of something that doesn't exist in the world. And even using it that way to kind of let their imagination blossom and let them really explore worlds that they physically are unable to. They're bedridden, sick kids. Is actually an amazing palliative care. And another example that he was talking about, which was mind-blowing to me, managed to program these sensors around the olive tree that he's growing on his terrace. And he's using AI to interpret the results from those sensors, like humidity in the soil, water, temperatures, and so on, and turn them into emotional outputs. So for instance, we know that when a tree is too dry, it's not doing very well, or when the humidity is too high, or when it doesn't have water, or when it has too much water. So in a sense, he was using AI to interpret really dry data sets and humanize them in a way that we as kind of empathetic beings would be able to engage with objects around us. And that to me was mind-blowing, because we think of nature as alive, but we never have a conversation with it. Whereas he was using AI to actually give elements of nature a voice. Like, can you imagine a city where nature actually speaks to you? Not directly. It's not Lord of the Rings, but somehow you use AI to process all of that data and bring it to life. Just as a by the way, because I remember when you mentioned it.
Oh, that's really cool. Actually, I didn't. Yeah, That's yeah, just processing it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Razvan, for your input and sharing your expertise and also all the things you've heard around the world. I just looked up Umbrellium as you were talking, and it seems quite cool. Making cities work for everyone, and they're really doing some cool digital stuff. Yeah. I guess for the audience, I'm not sure what I can type. It's called Umbrellium, like LLIUM.co.uk, Umbrellium. So you can check it out if you're free. Yeah. So do we have any more questions for us today? Maybe Wenwei, you'd like to. I'm very good at this arrow business.
Yeah, for me, actually, what I understand from agencies side, right? There's an upcoming Cornet X. There's a lot of parameters to be added in the beam component, but this is not like I'm not sure whether this contributes to the AI part where the parameters comes in for data-driven approach. So besides this generative AI with images and mood images, so I'm not sure how data-driven approach might have some impact on your site. So especially with the submissions and Cornet X with a lot of parameters where maybe it's not necessary for its value to be added or even have it to be there at the very early design stage. So maybe I'm not sure. So anyone or Razvan, you want to address or anyone? Yeah, thank you. Over.
How many times when you had to make a submission that day did you wake up in the morning looking forward to it? How many times?
Well, for the submission, right, is actually not, of course, it's not a lot.
Okay, not the act of clicking a button, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes,
Getting
yes.
ready to make the submission, right?
Yes.
So I think that, everyone wakes up with that jalat feeling, right? Well, maybe the speed of AI will somehow make it such that it's no longer a pain in the neck, right? Then again, I mean, a lot of these things that we don't look forward to doing, which are very procedural and complicated, we made them for ourselves. Like I think that's something that we never really remind ourselves, which is we've created the framework that gives us the pain. So I don't know, there's two ways of working around it. One is to thin out the framework and just agree on something that works and not fiddle with it every other day. But the other way is, okay, if we think that all of these things are needed, then perhaps you harness the power of AI to really work with all the procedural system and free us up for some of the things that will, make us get out of bed really looking forward to what interesting conversation am I going to have today with my engineers or with my clients or with the community? How can we make a better environment? How can we design a better city? How can we restore nature? At least that's my hope. So hopefully the technology takes care of itself, but then again, it's a vicious cycle, right? The more complicated we make things, the more technology we need to uncomplicate them, the more we complicate them again. So I don't have an answer, but at least that's my hope, is that we at least in the immediate sense, it'll get us out of a headlock that we put ourselves in by creating a system that is complicated. But yeah, mindful is already 4 minutes over. Not sure if there are any other questions, but really grateful for everyone's questions. Lots of interesting ones. Lots for me to take away from the chat tonight. And obviously, this was just a point in time, and all these were shared candidly as more of a rumination on the past, say, almost a year of using AI. And I'm happy to be proven wrong on everything. I think it's a ever-evolving relationship that we have with our own profession and with new technologies. And the whole point is stay curious and always move forward. Thank you for having me.
Reverend, I think thanks for giving that great sharing. I think you have touched on a few things which I probably like to emphasize more. is that as architects, you're shown to us that we have to look or be mindful or be conscious about, especially on the cultural and the social aspect of it, which rightfully, I think because of the developers chasing on a neck and all that, I think a lot of architects are in a way, I wouldn't say neglected, but probably distracted from that. I think you've shown that we have to look into that as well and give it a priority. The other aspect of it that I find that I can use as a takeaway is that your mention about control. Yes, AI may be there and maybe seems to be so wonderful and all that, but you're right. You have to get back control using AI to control what we really want to get at the end of the day. And we have shown us that we can actually use AI to hone our practice and to craft and ensure that we don't lose our craft as an architect. You just use it as a tool, basically, but ensure that we have the control and to get back what we want to deliver to the client or deliver a good product to the environment. So I'm very pleased and very glad that you shared all this, and I think that this is great tips for especially for the young architects here. Yeah. That's all.
Thanks, William.
Share.
Glad to
Thank
hear
you,
you,
William.
you got some value out of it.
Okay, so if we don't have anything else, I'll just like to thank all the audience for tuning in with us today. Yeah, I hope all of us benefited from this and kind of like open your minds and get us thinking on how we can use this new thing to our advantage. Yeah. So thank you once again, and yeah, join us for the next talk next month, and as well as with other SIA YL activities. Yeah.
The next one will be on 21st, right? 21st of June by Jason Lee.
21st. Oh, another one this month. Oh, I totally
Yes.
cannot remember.
Yes.
But yeah, so this is the third or fourth.
This should be
one,
the
right?
third one.
This is the
Third.
third one.
Third.
Third in a series of 6 on tech
7.
tech talks. Tech talks. Yeah.
7 tech talks.
7, third of 7. Yeah, third of 7. So join us in the next one. Join SIA if you haven't. Yeah, it'll be worth your time and worth your membership fee. Yeah.
And read the Singapore Architect. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Congratulations
Like,
for the
share,
series.
subscribe.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you.
Enjoy. Bye. 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 Bye.
Bye-bye.